Good morning. Grab your coffee, settle in, and let's talk about the world outside your window. Because honestly, it's changing faster than the headlines can keep up. For 30 years, we lived by a simple, unbreakable promise. Everything would be made wherever it was cheapest, and it would show up at your door without a second thought. It was the era of the global village. If you're holding a smartphone right now, you're holding a miracle of that era, a device with parts from 50 different countries, assembled in one and sold in another. But that era? It's over. The efficiency era is dead, and something much more complicated is taking its place. Let's look at the numbers, because the data is screaming right now. The global trade to GDP ratio, basically the heartbeat of how much the world buys and sells across borders, is at 54.8%. That's a 5.3% drop in just 3 years. Now, I know 5% sounds like a rounding error when you're looking at a spreadsheet, but in the world of global economics, that's a heart attack. It's the first real, sustained retreat from global integration since the end of the Cold War. We aren't just seeing a temporary supply chain glitch or a hangover from the pandemic. We're seeing a fundamental crack in the foundation. If you want to see where this is actually happening, look at the factory floors. U.S. imports from China have plummeted to under 14%, a drop of over 4% in a blink of an eye. Instead of made in China, we're seeing a massive construction boom in Mexico and across the American Rust Belt. It's not just about bringing jobs back, it's about building walls. We've moved from a world of seamless flow to a world of regional fortresses. The smartphone isn't a symbol of made in everywhere anymore. It's becoming a political statement, and this is the part you need to pay attention to. The foundation of the world as we know it hasn't just slipped, it's fractured.
So, how did we get here? How did we go from cheaper is better to secure is everything? There's a new term floating around boardrooms and policy circles that you need to know: friendshoring. It's the successor to offshoring. It used to be that companies moved production to wherever labor was cheapest. Now, they're moving it to whoever they trust, even if it costs more, even if it makes your next car or laptop $500 more expensive.
The math has changed because the logic has shifted from economics to national security. In the 90s, we optimized for the just-in-time delivery. Today, we're building for just in case. Here's the part that blew me away when I saw it. There are now over 3,000 active global trade restrictions in place. That is a staggering 172% jump in just 3 years. Think about that. Governments are passing new rules, bans, and tariffs at a rate we haven't seen in generations. Every time a new measure is passed, another brick goes into the wall. We're seeing the rise of what I call the new Monroe Doctrine, where every transaction is a political statement. If you're a CEO today, your biggest worry isn't your competitor, it's the geopolitical map. You aren't just managing a supply chain, you're managing an alliance. And the money is following the politics. Intra-regional trade share, trading with your neighbors instead of the world, has jumped to 63%. That's an 11% increase in a very short window. Global foreign direct investment is pouring into aligned blocks to the tune of $1.2 trillion. Let that sink in. Trillions of dollars are being rerouted, not to where the profit is highest, but to where the political risk is lowest. We're watching the veins of the global economy change color in real time. The money flowing through them doesn't just represent value anymore, it represents loyalty. I know sounds a bit dramatic, right? But look at the corporate behavior. When you see tech giants pulling out of established hubs to build multi-billion-dollar plants in friendly territory, they aren't doing it for the tax breaks alone. They're doing it because the global market is becoming a club market. You're either in the club or you're out. And if you're out, you don't get the chips, you don't get the energy, and you don't get the customers. If trade is the lifeblood of the economy, the heart is now beating for a much smaller, much more exclusive group of friends. Now, let's zoom out for a second, because this isn't just about shipping containers and factory lines. This is a war of currencies and resources. If you've been watching your portfolio or the news lately, you've seen the headlines about de-dollarization. It's a buzzy word, but the data shows it's not just talk. The US dollar's share in global reserves has slipped to 58.4%. That's a 2.5% drop. Again, sounds small? It's the lowest level in decades. After the freezing of Russian reserves, countries in the BRICS plus Bloc started asking a very uncomfortable question. If they can do that to them, can they do it to us? The response has been a literal gold rush. Central banks bought 1,037 tons of gold last year. That's a 140% increase. Countries like China, Poland, and Turkey are hoarding bullion as a hedge against a world where the dollar can be turned into a weapon. They aren't just buying gold, they're buying insurance against the fracture. We're seeing the rise of regional payment systems, nations settling oil deals in yuan or rupees. It's a currency desynchronization. The world is trying to figure out how to trade without having to rely on a single central system that could be switched off at any moment. But here's the real kicker: the resource block? You can't build a green future or a digital army without critical minerals. And right now, one player owns the refinery. China controls 85% of the refining for the minerals that make your EV batteries and your fighter jets work. When they slapped export controls on gallium and germanium last year, it sent a shockwave through the West. It was a reminder that in a fractured world, having the money isn't enough. You have to have the stuff. We're seeing the formation of a lithium bloc and a chip bloc, and they don't overlap. So you have currency wars on one side and resource wars on the other. It's a pincer movement on the old global order. When the math of the global system stops working, economists start sweating, and for good reason. We are moving into an era where the price of your morning coffee isn't determined by a farmer in Brazil and a roaster in Italy, but by the diplomatic tensions between the bloc that owns the shipping lanes and the bloc that owns the currency. To understand where this road ends, we have to look back at the last time the world decided to tear itself into pieces. History doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes, and right now the rhyme sounds a lot like 1932 back then. It was the Ottawa Imperial Preference System. The British Empire basically decided to close its borders and only trade within its own club using the pound sterling. The US responded with the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, and the world economy shattered into rival blocs. The similarity today is about 88%. Back then, it was about colonial empires. Today, it's about value-based blocs. But the stakes are higher now because our world is way more integrated. You can't just cut the cord on a modern supply chain without causing a massive multi-trillion-dollar spark. There is a massive experts war going on right now about what this costs us. On one side, you have Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen arguing that friendshoring is the only way to build resilience. She says it's a necessary price for security. On the other side, Geeta Gopinath from the IMF is sounding the alarm. Her team estimates the Great Fracture could cost the global economy up to $7 trillion. That is 7% of global GDP. To put that in perspective, that's like the entire economies of Germany and Japan just vanishing. That's the efficiency tax we might have to pay for living in a safer, but more divided world. But here's the twist. There are hidden winners in this chaos. We call them the connector economies. Look at Mexico and Vietnam. While the US and China are decoupling, Mexico's exports to the US are hitting record highs. Why? Because Chinese firms are setting up near-shore factories in places like Monterrey to maintain access to the US market. They're acting as the secret bridges, the trade launderers of the new era. They're the only ones keeping the two halves of the world from completely drifting apart. But even these bridges are under pressure as the blocs demand total loyalty. So we're left with a choice: resilience or cost, security or growth. This $7 trillion gamble, the equivalent of losing two of the world's largest economies, leads us to one final question. What does your daily life actually look like in the age of the fracture? Does the world just get more expensive, or does it get fundamentally smaller? Think about that next time you see your electricity bill or check the price of a new phone. You aren't just paying for the labor and the parts anymore. You're paying for the alliance that made it possible. We are entering the era of neo-mercantilism. It's a world where stability is valued more than speed, and national security is the ultimate bottom line. Yes, things will likely become more expensive. Inflationary pressure is the shadow that follows every trade barrier. But the goal of this new system isn't to make you rich quick. It's to make sure the system doesn't break entirely when the next crisis hits. We're moving from a global market where you were just a consumer to a fractured world where you are a citizen of a chosen bloc. When you buy a product now, you aren't just buying a brand, you're buying into an alliance. The Great Fracture isn't the end of the world economy, but it is the end of the world as we knew it. We might see a form of re-globalization, diversifying trade to India, Africa, and Southeast Asia, which could actually reduce inequality in the long run. But the path there is rocky, and the old referees, like the WTO, are effectively paralyzed. In this new era, the most valuable currency isn't the dollar, and it isn't gold. It's who you can actually trust to keep the lights on and the shelves full. The global village is gone. Welcome to the age of the fortress. Choose your neighbors wisely.